Hello, my friends. For years now, decades literally, I've been running around giving talks and speeches and such, telling people that the big change is coming, that we're going to have a new transition to a new era that would result in a new human in a new world. And of course, I believed all of this. And often I would say, it's a new world. It's not like the old one, so it's really going to be different. And you can tell by historical kind of trends and precedents, every time in previous times that there have been major kind of shifts like this, that each succeeding one is bigger and bigger, 10 times bigger than the one that precedes it. And the transition times are shorter and shorter. And so it's far more abrupt and disruptive than in the past. And you can say all of that stuff and believe it. And there's one thing to believe it like I did and trying to at least communicate that kind of concept to folks. And I often came away believing that many of the people kind of heard the words but didn't understand how extraordinarily different this new world would necessarily be if even just looking at the kind of exponential trend from history that was pointing into the middle of this big shift. And even as we got into it in the last couple of years, with particularly with COVID and stuff, and when it became impossible in some cases to understand what is real and what is true, and where truth, as we know it, it was commonly discounted or uh, bypassed by governments and agencies and corporations and such. And it's more than just politicians and the usual, and used car salesmen doing it. We all kind of had an understanding of kind of where the fringy edges of all of this were, but there was always kind of in the middle a solid kind of island, if you will, that you could kind of trust and you believed. Up until recently, you trusted the media. I spent years listening to National Public Radio, fully believing and convinced that they were objective and telling, the news, presenting the news in ways that you couldn't find it on CNN and other kind of places. And I've been in the wild card business. The second book that I wrote was about wild cards. The fact that it makes sense to you that when I say wild cards, that we're talking about big surprises and stuff, is because I coined that term. And did the first book on how to systematically think about big surprises and how they come and what they would do. And so I've been able to, because I studied this stuff, is to be able to kind of anticipate and see some of the big things that were coming downstream, like AI, and before that, the internet. As a matter of fact, I had people come to me 10, 15 years later and say, "You're the first guy that ever heard, that ever understood what the World Wide Web was going to be," and so on. And so there was, it was easy to run down the list of all of the things that were the incoming big surprises, the wild cards. Things like the alien kind of issue, UFOs and such, and the emerging, impending kind of engagement with life from off of this planet. Certainly rapid climate change, particularly in the likelihood that it's going to get cold rather than hot, and that humans weren't doing it was one of those. And you could artificial intelligence, artificial general intelligence was always in there, along with any of a number of other such things. And those wild cards, those potential surprises that could go any of a number of kind of ways, were always kind of laced through the middle of the kind of scenarios that we'd build and I would build and help people build about alternative futures and what the world might look like and what it might show up. And the approach that I took, that is unique, as best I can tell, in the futures environment, is that I would happily and try to look at the full spectrum of reality as we know it, horizontally, if you will, across all of the usual kind of things like economics and politics and energy and so on. But also kind of vertically, so that it was other dimensional kind of things, like I say, with aliens and other forces that are in play, and certainly, energies out of the galaxy and other such things that are really not factored into most of the analysis that gets done about the future. And with that kind of rather broad kind of input, it was pretty easy to start to build alternative scenarios, some of which were really quite strange and different and unusual from a kind of a conventional point of view. Well, necessarily. I mean, you were using inputs that came from other dimensions and other such things. And certainly the fact that you took a kind of a systems perspective and a very broad one was unusual, because most people don't think in those kind of terms. Most people are specialists and they look in one area of interest or where they have responsibility or another. But even if you broaden your aperture and you expand it in these kinds of ways, you come up with a broad spectrum of potential scenarios and possibilities that you kind of don't talk about in polite company in some cases, because people just really don't are not particularly they don't cotton to this kind of stuff. And but if you're gonna have kind of intellectual integrity, you keep it inside, but you think about it all the time, because you can't just discount stuff because a bunch of people who haven't thought about it think it's a stupid idea. I mean, come on. So I have built lots of scenarios and thought a lot of things about how aliens would show up and what they might do, and how you'd have big flares out of the sun, and and what the impact of all these things and multiple ones all happening at the same time, which complicates things and blows up the world in far more interesting ways. And even it's been easy 7 years ago or something like that, I first put a category in where I collect information on my computer and about Civil War in the United States. And so you could see some of these kind of possibilities coming downstream a long time ago, when most people thought it was kind of foolish. I first remember talking about this back in 2003 and trying to make the case to my friends and clients in Singapore that the United States was going to come apart. And it was like I was from another planet or something. I mean, the United States was the biggest and most substantial company and country and economy in the planet on the world, and the notion that it might come apart, it was ludicrous. We were the biggest, most stable and dominant force around, but you could see the fissures and the shortcomings in the structure and the kind of the internal kind of workings of the system if you look for it. And so I spent a lot of time wandering around in space that a lot of other people don't. And in a sense, you think you've probably heard about most everything that is possible or likely or something like that. I mean, if you spend your time all the time thinking about it, you may not be highly knowledgeable about one particular thing or something, but to not heard about things and really not ever thought about them is kind of surprising in my business. I'm in the business of trying to think about things before other people do, I guess. Uh, but I always get drawn back to this kind of notion that I said is that this world that is going to come downstream is going to be really big and really different from anything that we really understand or have experienced before. And it's not just more of the same stuff or a great deal more of the same kinds of things that we already understand. No, it's an environment that just really doesn't operate, and it has different kind of motivations and different kind of content structure than what we have. And so it's one thing to kind of talk in those kinds of terms, which I've done a great deal, and to be relatively well informed about lots of things that are going on and trying to weave them together into coherent kind of pictures and ideas, visions about alternative futures, and be able to and tell people that it's really going to be different and it's really going to be different. And then as this whole thing just starts to accelerate into this new space, to suddenly start to say, wait a second, this is crazy different than what I ever thought about in some kind of way. And one little example is that a couple of days ago, I had somebody that was here visiting who said, "Oh, have you heard about the scenario with the methane blowing up the world?" And I said, "No. What do you mean methane?" He said, "Oh, yeah, they've kept it quiet, and but there's a lot of science, but they've in the United States, they've told them they can't talk about it. The government scientists, at least, you can't talk about it. And that the tundra up in the northern latitudes, Siberian stuff, is warming up enough that it's melting, and what it's doing is releasing a lot of methane." Well, I said, "Oh, yeah, I've heard about that." And but I mean, I heard about the likelihood or the possibility that would happen, but I was certainly not being current about the situation. Well, he says, "Well, it's going to be it's increase the amount of methane in the atmosphere by 30%. And I said, "Well, wait a second. I've never heard about that." And he said, "Oh, yeah. And the scientists that I work with, they say that, if you have a solar flare or something like that, which has, he's telling me that's happened before, and then you get this, it's like, as he explained, it's like, it's like, welding and having welding sparks fly into gasoline and the fumes of gasoline. And he says, they have two scenarios, and one is that it all explodes in a big fiery ball because it ignites all of the methane in the upper atmosphere, and the other one is that it just starts a giant fire and it just burns all over the place. And I'm up, and I say, wait, man, never heard of that. I mean, and I try to kind of moderate some of the crazy scenarios and the wild kind of possibilities that I think about, because it doesn't do much. I mean, by the way, it doesn't do much good to raise these kinds of possibilities. There's not much you can do about it. All you do is make people afraid and maybe try to dig a deeper hole or find another well or buy another gun or some other thing. And but here's another kind of wild and kind of new thing that's coming along. But then one of my friends a week ago sent me a link to something called synthetic biology. And I had a middling knowledge about it, not a whole lot. But this was an hour-long presentation about exactly what was happening in this kind of space. And synthetic biology is essentially developing digital replacements for everything in the human body. That is to say, in time, is to produce a complete synthetic human being that is all digital. And starting with cells and the kind of things that you've heard about, putting little nanobots in your brain and running around in your bloodstream and other such things. But it's more than that. It's like reprogramming your DNA and converting it into digital stuff, into digital format rather than kind of the analog one, I guess, that you presume that it is. And that there was for the last 20 years at least, there's been just warp speed kind of advancements being made in this kind of space. The ultimate objective is to convert us all from being humans to digital entities, robots, right? And maybe maintain some aspect of the human, the soul, if you will, or something. I don't know exactly if these people think in those kinds of terms. I'm about to tell you that I think some of them do. And but in any case, it is it's not like humans as we kind of understand them and have all of our lives becoming even more advanced in terms that I've talked about, like being able to manifest and have an intuition and such like that. This is like converting human beings into a completely digital entity that, of course, can then be engineered and used and dominated and overpowered and controlled in kind of any way that you wanted to do. Every once in a while, I run into a situation where I know there's a little bit about something, some industry that I know something about, and suddenly I watch a video or I do something else, and I suddenly realize how deep and complex it is underneath. And we run around. I mean, the easy example is automobiles, and that we all kind of drive cars around, and almost nobody knows how they work. I mean, the ones that are out The new ones that are out here have something like 450 microprocessors, computers in them. That is presuming that the chips are supplied, which is a real problem with automobiles right now. So you don't know anything about it. I mean, I had it explained to me by these guys is that there's nothing mechanical in the whole system hardly. That is to say, you're not steering the car, you're steering a computer, which is then moving actuators and stuff that steer the car, and everything is removed from direct kind of control, except maybe the emergency brake, but I don't even know if that's true. But in any case, and hackable, of course, and that of course seems to be the trend that all of this is going down, is to turn everything into this digitized version of whatever they were and whatever, and to then be able to hack it and change it into whatever they want it to be. Obviously, you look around and you have these deep fakes, and you cannot tell visually what something is, whether it's real or not. And they're working their way into projection holography and large scale kind of things. I saw a video the other day of a huge major projection that was multiple times as big as high-rise buildings up into the sky, and it was three-dimensional looking, and you look at it and say, here come the aliens, or they're aliens if that's what they want to send. That's the basis for being able to project and to show you whatever they want to show you, whatever they can generate from computers. And we're at the place at this point, at least, where we can't tell the difference, and there are a whole lot of people who would not even question it. And of course, that's the basis on why they're pursuing these kinds of things. And so it seems to be, I guess, it's a race. It seems to be a race that has an end point that's sometime between 2027 and 2030. That these one track is moving toward this digitization. I've always called it technocracy, where the technocrats are the ones who kind of dominate everything. But you think about that in terms of, say, elections and stealing elections and things like that. But I've never occurred to me that within a handful of years they get to the place where they would essentially replace humanity. And not this was something else that they got going, but they would duplicate and replace humanity. It's a giant kind of big idea that lends itself to movies like Matrix and other such things, and that were maybe warnings, or maybe they were, maybe they were presented to us to start to put the ideas in our minds about these kinds of possibilities, such that we could kind of rise to the occasion and do what we need to do in order to not succumb to all of that. But in any case, the thing is, it is getting, it's moving very rapidly. Artificial intelligence. I heard a guy who was way at the leading edge of this chat GPT and other kind of these web bots or chat boxes talking, and he says, every day, I cannot miss one day. I have to scan all the scientific literature, because this whole area is moving so fast that if I miss one, the stuff is moving so fast in different kind of directions that if I miss one for one day, I will be behind and I will not be able to compete with the people that I have to compete with. Well, what about the rest of us who have no idea even what to look at, let alone how to make sense out of it, or that the whole dynamic is operating at that kind of space? And so this is a again, just as kind of repeating the basic kind of notion is we're going into a space that is really, really different. And it is going to, even if you, you know, maintain your humanness and you are effective in pushing yourself or driving yourself or allowing yourself to emerge and up to the next level of human and evolution. Uh, raising your consciousness or becoming awake or whatever the term that you want to do, we're going to be surrounded by all of this other stuff going on. And it's like being in the middle of a freaking crazy video game or, the Matrix movie. The more I think about it, the more I think that that the Matrix movie is probably the best kind of, kind of coherent kind of concept and idea that we've been exposed to that gives us some idea about where part of the world, a goodly part of the world is going. Of course, if it's all digitized, then it is kind of a plug-in compatible with an AI and artificial intelligence. And so if this has increasing numbers of big thinkers are coming to the conclusion that we live in some kind of an artificial intelligence, i.e. a matrix, then when you see this wholesale digitization across almost every area in life, you can see that it's all it makes a whole lot of sense that it's all moving into a direction that could be like a movie someday. So it'll be I just said it and I'll say it again. It'll be interesting as we go forward into this space. And I just want you to be aware of some of that. So we'll talk to you again.